recording the best video you will ever see in your life.
My name's David.
And my name is Maria.
And today we're going to talk about
North and South.
North and South is a social novel written by the English writer Elizabeth Gaskell and is situated in the first years of the Industrial Revolution. Elizabeth Cleham Gaskell was born in Chelsea on September 29, 1810. Her mother died when she was only 2 years old, so she lived in multiple cities around England with different family members. After marrying a minister, she started living in Manchester. This inspired many of her industrial novels. She was constantly surrounded by important writers, religious, and social erudites. North and South was first published by Dickens House from September 1854 to January 1855.
So now let's talk about the actual story. Our plot begins with the main character called Margaret. She's visiting her cousin in London because her cousin Edith is getting married. So after her cousin gets married, she goes back to her hometown to her parents, and there her father tells her that he can no longer be a minister because he has a change of ideologies, and they're moving to a city called Milton, which is basically Manchester. It's in northern London. It's really polluted, and it is also really industrial. There's a lot of factories, and they're moving there because his father is tutoring a guy. So when they move, Margaret meets the guy who's called Thornton, and they hate each other at first sight because, well, basically Margaret thinks Thornton is a bad person, and Thornton thinks Margaret is very self-entitled and very proud, like too proud for what she actually is. So Thornton owns a factory. This is why he's a middle-class man, but he has a lot of money. And in this factory, there's a strike because the salaries aren't fair. So it's one of the reasons why Margaret thinks he's a bad person, because he won't raise the salaries, he has strikes, everybody's angry, etc., etc. So Margaret's mother falls ill and is dying because of the condition of the air. Since there are a lot of factories, the air is terrible and her mother is dying. So she tells Margaret she has a brother who is being prosecuted because of a riot in a boat, and Margaret contacts him, and he comes to town, he meets his mother, her mother dies, and everything is well, but Thornton thinks he is her boyfriend. I know, oh my god, but it isn't, it's her brother. So Thornton is pretty angry because, I mean, obviously Thornton likes Elizabeth. So after this happens, after this whole thing happens, Margaret is walking around with his brother, and they meet a guy, and this guy knows her brother is a criminal. So he's like, "You're a criminal, I have to tell the police, they have to arrest you." And the brother gets super nervous and he kills him. So he has to flee the country again, and Margaret is being linked to the murder of this guy because they saw her talking to him. So Thornton has to pull some strings, and Margaret goes free. And while this happened, Margaret's father was really depressed because of her mother's death, and he decides to go to Oxford, where he dies of depression. So when he's in Oxford, after he dies, since Margaret is now an orphan, she has to move back to her aunt in London with Edith. And there she lives for a while, and then a guy called Mr. Bell, who is a friend of her father, dies, and he had inherited everything from her father. And he also had a lot of lands in Milton. So he dies, and Margaret, his heir. So she inherits everything from this Mr. Bell, and she becomes the landlady of Thornton because Mr. Bell owned Thornton's land.
We Milton masters have today set in our decisions we won't advance a penny. We tell them we may have to lower wages, but can't afford to raise. So here we stand, waiting for their next attack. This quote explains the social and economic context. Masters would lower the wages as much as possible in order to keep more money to themselves. It also talks about the unfair conditions of the working class during the Industrial Revolution. so obviously workers were angry and started making strikes. This particular quote talks about manipulation toward the worker and kind of a negotiation point.
Fancy living in the middle of factories and factory people. Though, of course, if your father leaves the church, we shall not be admitted into society anywhere. It will be such a disgrace to us.
So social conventionalism is another very important topic in the book. When Margaret tells her mother that they are moving to Milton Northern, her mother is mortified because they are gonna go live where the lower classes, the factory people live, and she really despises lower classes, factory people, because she's a society woman. It was just normal at the time because higher classes had to despise lower classes. So when also she's mortified because her husband is quitting church, and even though church and religion didn't have such an important role in society at the time, it was still important. It was social conventionalism that you were religious, and they still belonged to a high class because her husband was a minister. But now that there wasn't even that, she was just, I mean, she being a society woman was mortified, and quitting church was social suicide, quoting Mean Girls. So that there's a quote she says that sums this up, which is,
I would rather be a man toiling, suffering, failing, and successless here than live a dull, prosperous life in the old worn groups of what you call more aristocratic society down in the south with their slow days of careless ease.
This quote is a comparison between the two regions of England. It is part of the historical context because it helps us understand how England was divided in those times.
Mr. Hale treated all his fellow creatures alike. It never entered into his head to make any difference because of their rank.
equality is another topic we can find in the book. It's another theme. From the beginning of the book, we can see Mr. Hale is not a normal man for the time. He quits church. He has a lot of ideologies, and he's an equalitarian man. That being a high class man who belonged to the church, it wasn't normal. It wasn't usual. It was you can see a lot of individual perspective in here. So he didn't care if someone was rich or poor. He just cared that they were good persons. And also throughout the book, you can see Elizabeth Gaskell actually agreeing with him a lot and having this posture because she accentuates this topic a lot, which was at the time was very radical because higher classes had to despise lower classes. That was just how it is and how it worked because of social classes.
In the first place, Margaret felt guilty and ashamed of having grown so much into a woman as to be thought of in marriage.
Margaret Hale is an independent and outspoken woman, so she's actually ashamed of a man having proposed her to marry him. Mainly because she thinks she is too good for any man he has met, and she likes to set her sights on more important things like community and morality.